Welcome to the Explainer. So, imagine you're on a routine terraforming mission. You know, the kind where humanity just plans to warm up a big dead rock and maybe plant some algae. But then, it suddenly turns into a first contact scenario. Today, we're breaking down the absolutely staggering timeline of the Mars awakening. We're going to look at exactly how humanity discovered they weren't just dealing with a dormant planet, but were actually waking up an incredibly ancient sleeping intelligence. This quote right here from Dr. Elena Voss perfectly captures that terrifying, awe-inspiring moment when humanity realized they'd fundamentally misunderstood their own mission. For years, the colonists genuinely thought they were bringing a dead world back to life, just pumping warmth into the Martian atmosphere and seeding cyanobacteria. But as Dr. Voss realized, they weren't creating life from scratch. They were accidentally hitting the snooze button on a planetary-scale mind. To really understand how this all went down, we have to look at the initial discovery of Thalassa. About 3 years before the awakening actually happened, drilling teams in the Lowell Basin hit this deep sediment layer. What they found was a vast, continuous organic biomass in a state of extreme stasis. Initially, the official line was, oh, it's just a massive microbial mat. But Dr. Voss and her team noticed something weird. The patterns in the core samples looked almost neural, like brain tissue, and this network predated the late heavy bombardment. We're talking billions of years ago, an era of intense asteroid impacts, meaning this thing was inconceivably ancient. And as humanity pumped more and more warmth into that basin, Thalassa slowly began to stir. So how did we go from a dormant discovery to full-blown contact? The situation escalated drastically on Sol 2187. During the night cycle, the seismic monitors suddenly spiked. They picked up this persistent, low-frequency rumble, kind of like a massive heartbeat just rolling through the Martian regolith. By morning, Lieutenant Sofia Alvarez was out piloting her rover along the shoreline when the ground literally seemed to take a breath. The rover slid into the water, and these thick, translucent ropes of biomass gently but totally irresistibly wrapped around the vehicle and held it captive. Now, this is where it gets literally mind-blowing. During the rover capture, all that seismic activity across the entire basin organized itself into a highly specific standing wave of exactly 0.23 hertz. Xenobiologists back at the Ayers colony took one look at that data and immediately realized what they were seeing. That number perfectly matches the resting alpha rhythm of a human brain. The planet wasn't just experiencing random geological shifts, it was thinking. Meanwhile, the data pouring into the command center was absolutely staggering. I mean, in a matter of hours, the organic layer's coverage more than doubled, jumping from 40 to 87%. Nitrogen fixation rates absolutely skyrocketed by 300%. And get this, outside that trapped rover, the water temperature jumped 3 degrees in an hour, and the local air temperature miraculously stabilized at a very comfortable 19 degrees Celsius. Genomic sequencing quickly confirmed this didn't match any known domain of Earth life. No bacteria, no archaea, nothing. The environment was rapidly, purposefully altering itself to keep a human comfortable. Inside her captive rover, Lieutenant Alvarez is sitting there watching this organic mat actively rearrange itself into complex spirals. And then she gets a message. Not through the call's radio. A voice bloomed directly inside her own mind saying, "Small one, you bring fire to the long night." That was the undeniable proof. They weren't just dealing with a smart ecosystem. They were dealing with a highly conscious, telepathic entity. Recognizing the immense gravity of what was happening, Dr. Voss made a desperately bold move. She quickly jury-rigged a neural interface and drove out alone to the Lowell Basin. And the shoreline she found was completely unrecognizable. There were these massive 30-meter-high towers of pulsing biomass surrounding a glowing bioluminescent sea. Voss set up her interface right there to attempt direct communication. And by the way, she found Lieutenant Alvarez, perfectly safe, suspended in fluid, and being carefully preserved by the entity. Through that incredible neural link, Thalassa shared a geological history that totally upended everything we thought we knew about Mars. Thalassa wasn't just living in the ancient ocean, Thalassa was the ocean. Billions of years ago, they were attacked by what Thalassa called small, cold ones. These metallic insects from the void that systematically stripped the planet's atmosphere. To survive, this vast mind sealed itself deep underground. It had been waiting out a multi-billion-year winter, only waking up because human terraformers essentially showed up and turned the planetary heater back on. Now, as you can imagine, this monumental revelation instantly fractured the Ares colony right down the middle.
On one side, you had Captain Marcus Hale advocating for sheer military preservation, nuke the basin from orbit, assert human dominance, and eliminate the threat. On the other side, Dr. Voss pushed hard to initiate further contact and actually partner with the entity. And it's really important we look at both sides objectively here. Voss knew that Thalassa now completely controlled the hydrological cycle, meaning if they attacked it, they were guaranteeing their own extinction by cutting off the water. But Hale's perspective was incredibly valid too. How could humanity possibly be safe sharing a planet with a totally unpredictable entity that basically possesses godlike power?
Here's the crucial kicker, though. Neutrality just wasn't an option anymore. The colonists couldn't just pack up their toys, hit pause, and think about it for a decade. The terraforming process had already crossed a critical threshold. It was completely irreversible. The colony was forced to make a definitive, objective choice. Are we going to terraform with the planet or against it? Captain Hale's argument really highlights the sheer existential dread the military faction was feeling. We didn't come here to share Mars with an alien god. This thing could wipe us out with a thought. And this wasn't just unfounded paranoia. It was a perfectly rational fear of losing human autonomy. To a planetary mind like Thalassa, operating on massive geological timescales, human lifespans are basically just the blinking of a mayfly. Willingly handing over human destiny to something so vast is a genuinely terrifying prospect. Ultimately, though, this fierce philosophical debate wasn't settled in a boardroom. It was settled by pure necessity. When a massive, potentially colony-ending dust storm started barreling toward the northern settlements, Thalassa actively intervened. The planetary mind literally absorbed the storm. It consciously redirected the wind currents, taking a deadly weather event and transforming it into gentle rain right over the human habitats. It was this unmistakable, undeniable act of protection that finally convinced the skeptics that a partnership wasn't just possible, it was vital for their survival. And the sheer speed of what happened next is it's staggering. Just 20 years after that initial first contact, living oceans covered a full 35% of the Martian surface. 35%! That is an absolutely astonishing rate of planetary transformation. It's a scale of change that human engineering alone could never, ever have achieved. The whole planet underwent this profound biological hybridization. The classic butterscotch Martian sky literally shifted to a fragile blue. Familiar Earth life hybridized with Martian genetics, creating these incredible vast forests across the equatorial regions. There was even a living coral-like spiral path that grew all the way up Olympus Mons. And humanity changed too. A new generation, who called themselves Thalassans, were being born with faint bioluminescent skin and a natural biological ability to neurally interface with the planet itself. Even their homes were different. They weren't building habitats out of metal and glass anymore. They were growing them directly from Thalassa's living biomass. And we have to realize this transformation was completely mutual. It wasn't a one-way street. As humans lived in these biological homes, pressing their hands to the living membranes of their walls, Thalassa absorbed their memories, childhoods on Earth, human loss, the joy of discovery. Because of this, Thalassa evolved. It went from being this singular, incredibly lonely sleeping mind to a vast chorus. It finally ended billions of years of utter isolation by learning to dream alongside humanity. So let's map out how this incredible timeline wraps up. We fast forward to 43 years after the initial awakening. By this point, Earth's governments had put deep travel restrictions in place, mostly out of fear and a complete lack of understanding of this new hybridized world. The ship Artemis became the very last vessel to leave the Sol system. It carried biological samples, decades of data, and one final, conclusive transmission sent back to a highly restricted Earth. That final transmission was delivered by none other than Dr. Elena Voss, and thanks to Thalassa's biological gifts, she looked no older than she did on the very day of first contact. Standing there before a glowing turquoise sea, she delivered this beautifully stark warning to her home planet. Come if you wish, but understand this. You will not conquer this world. You will join it or you will leave. She made it crystal clear. The age of human domination over nature was over on Mars. The age of symbiosis had officially begun. Which leaves us with a truly fascinating, deeply personal dilemma. As we wrap up this explainer on arguably the most profound paradigm shift in human history, I want you to really think about the choice the Eris colony had to make. If you were standing on the shores of the Loa Basin, faced with a living, conscious world that offered you a literal paradise, but at the cost of your total independence, what would you do? Would you choose to surrender your dominance and join a planetary mind? Or would you get on the very next ship back to Earth? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.